Hello, everyone. My name is Tarani Nethagani. I use she, her, hers pronouns, and I am absolutely thrilled to be with all of you here today. Our next panel is called Weaving Connections, Community, and Climate Leaders. This discussion will highlight the vital intersection of climate justice and community leadership, featuring 3 incredible leaders driving change. Heather McTeer Toney is the executive director of the Beyond Petrochemicals campaign and is the former mayor of Greenville, Mississippi, the first Black woman and youngest person to hold that office. With a deep commitment to grassroots activism and policy change, she has been a leading voice in the environmental movement to defend communities of color. Jacqueline Patterson is the founder and executive director of the Chisholm Legacy Project, an initiative dedicated to empowering Black communities through climate and economic justice, in addition to sustainability efforts. A lifelong advocate for social justice, she previously served as the NAACP Environmental and Climate Justice Program, where she championed policies to protect frontline communities from environmental harm. And Rhiana Gunn-Wright is the former climate policy director of the Roosevelt Institute and one of the key contributors to the Green New Deal. Her work focuses on designing policies that not only address the climate crisis, but also centers on racial, economic, and social justice. With expertise in policy innovation and equity-driven solutions, she has played a crucial role in shaping a just transition to a sustainable future. Our faculty moderator for today is Kimberly Peerler-Allen, a visiting practitioner at the Center for American Women and Politics at Rutgers University, as well as the co-founder of Higher Heights, an organization dedicated to grow the presence of Black women's political power and leadership. As an expert in advocacy, political engagement, and inclusivity, she has worked to drive and increase representation and amplify the voices of marginalized women at the local and national levels. We are truly grateful to have her guiding today's conversation. Now, please join me in welcoming our panelists and faculty moderator as we explore the power of community-driven climate action.
Thank you so much, Ronnie, for that introduction. And I'm going to this is going to be a real conversation between these dynamic women who have such incredible stories and commitments to the work that we really want to be able to give them the opportunity to dig in about their personal path to this work, as well as what they're finding in the field across the board and recommendations that they can give to all of us moving forward. So, in my work in empowering women seeking elected office, it also is very parallel to what happens when women seek leadership. We 9 times out of 10 do not seek leadership for the title, but to change something. And that change, that motivation for that change, is driven by a personal value. So I'd like each of our panelists to take a few moments and share with us what is your personal value that brought you to climate justice work?
So where do we start? Good afternoon, everyone. Heather McTeer Toney, and it's great to be here. And I want to say first, I appreciate so much being able to do this at Rutgers. My father is a Rutgers law graduate, and so good to be here, representing my dad, and the Center for American Women in Politics was just so important in how we think about women in politics. And you asked a really interesting question, because the value of community and community building has always been present in my life. But really what drove me to run was being ticked off and just a little upset at what was going on in the community. And I think we should also give a bit of space to how women respond when we are in moments of crisis and unfortunately moments of movement building that require Black women in particular to be the movers and shakers. It's what I knew coming up in Mississippi, and I was born and raised in the Mississippi Delta. My father was one of Fannie Lou Hamer's last attorneys. And so I just come from a space that's very steeped in women leading and moving, but not doing so in a way that was bashful or shameful. It was and always is in a space of this is our community, this is what must be done, and you're gonna do what I tell you to say, whether you like it or not. So I think there's something to be said about that value of ownership, of knowing that we are worthy, and that being a part of who we are internally. And I'm grateful that I'm living in a time where we, Black women, are celebrating that amongst ourselves right now.
This is a hard question because I'm a Libra and you're asking me to make a decision. I will say that what started me on this path was aggression. Like Heather said, I was pissed off. But I think what's kept me in this work is, honestly, it sounds weird to say, but delight. I am just, as much as people get on my nerves, I'm like obsessed with other people. And they like constantly surprise and delight me. And I guess I just keep wanting to fight for a world where we treat people like they are worth something. And where we sort of create conditions where people can be as delightful as possible, because when people aren't broke, they're a lot nicer. And, like more enjoyable.
Yeah, thank you. And my voice isn't usually so sultry. I actually have a cold of some sort, so sorry about that. So I think it was an interesting question, and I think I gravitated towards the word belonging and inclusion. And kind of similarly, I wrote an article in December called "How Did You Find Us?" and it was based on, we've been mapping communities across the country and really identifying the most the most marginalized communities that are according to the map. So according to the data, everything from income to the communities that are most exposed to pollution to communities that are unincorporated and aren't necessarily part of the democracy. And then we have organizers that go out to those communities, and the most often the reaction that they get the most often when they roll up in communities is, "How did you find us?" And so the notion that they don't even feel like they're seen or a part of, just like they feel like they're out there in the wilderness, is what really drives the work that I've been doing around climate justice, is the communities that are most impacted, the communities that are least responsible, the communities that are holding the least power in this system, and the communities that don't feel seen or included or And I want to say in a democracy, but it's not even a democracy by virtue of the fact that they're not included. And so the belonging and inclusion is really what's driven me into this work. Thank you.
Pulling on that thread, I always go back to this quote from Massachusetts Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley, who said that the people closest to the pain should be the closest to the power and driving and informing policymaking. Could each of you take a minute and just talk about your work, because you each are doing this. How do you bring the people who are closest to the pain closest to the policy making and the policy solving, and how that has been going for you? So we'll start with you, Jackie.
Okay.
Since you picked up the thread that I was about to.
Thank you. Yeah, so as we said, the name of the organization is the Chisholm Legacy Project, named after Shirley Chisholm, and one of her most famous quotes is, "If you don't have a seat at the table, bring a folding chair." And so our work and our mission is about being a folding chair for the communities that are the most distant from power and from policies, and so that we've seen time and time again how policies get set that that not only don't do what they aim to do, or let's say they don't do what they profess to do, but they, in some cases, unfortunately, they do exactly what they're aiming to do. Even communities that are, policies that are supposed to to level the playing field, that are supposed to bridge resources. I think about urban renewal policies, for example. People also call them Negro removal policies. And so so when we think about if it had been, instead of people who are invested in holding power, invested in money being held by developers and so forth, that are often developing these policies, but if it was frontline communities that were developing these policies, then we would see a very different outcome. And the folks who are, the people who kind of sell you on these policies have this, put across this scarcity narrative that is very counter to the abundance. There is definitely enough to go around, but they sell this notion that there's an inverse relationship between my well-being and an immigrant's well-being, my well-being and a trans person's well-being, and so forth and so on. And so that's what allows these policies to continue to get made that are directly against the self-interest, the community interest, the interest of all of us. That would be if the policies were being driven by the people. So that's what I would say as a start.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would say, so my work has often not been in direct service. So I've been like a step removed from interacting directly with communities for a lot of my career. That being said, whenever I had the power, I would start my research questions or start working on any policy issue by talking to folks in the community. So for instance, I worked on a gubernatorial campaign and we put out something like 1,500 pages of policy. And the way that we did that was one of the first things we would call whenever the candidate was like, oh, I want an urban agenda, I want this, is we would reach out to activists and community activists and sit down and say, okay, if it was an urban agenda, what are the problems that you're seeing and how would you want us to solve them? And then they would give us some ideas. We would go back, look at the laws, draft something up, and then go to them and say, does this look like what you would imagine? Does this address the problems? And it was really interesting because after a while, people started to notice the policy and they would go, how did you end up writing about publicly provided broadband or housing foreclosure, tax policy? And it was because we had gone to folks who work directly in those communities and crafted policy on that. And it started drawing more and more people in because when people read that, they felt seen. Mm-hmm. They felt like we actually understood or at least cared, right, what was going on. I mean, we did field work for a rural agenda in Upper Michigan in February. It was terrifying. Well, it was mostly just super cold. But I say that because, I know in my heart the quality of the work that we did was leagues above the people we were campaigning against because of that. And so it was really interesting when I moved into the climate movement, sort of from working on the Green New Deal, the sort of mainstream climate movement, there's still a real idea there that communities have nothing to say, that climate justice activists actually don't care about parts per million or greenhouse gas emissions, and they have nothing to offer. And honestly, it makes us write stupid policy, right? Because we actually are not learning from the people who most know and understand the antagonists we're up against. Like, we're not talking to community activists who have fought fossil fuel corporations in their neighborhood for a decade, right? We're relying on people who, because they haven't often have access to that or lived experience, believe what petrochemical lobbyists say in meetings, right? I work with a number of people who do not realize the extent to which they are lied to, right? And then build policy based on how people are showing up at New York Times roundtables. That's not actually who they are, nor are those like 70% of the tactics that they use. And because of that, we lose so much knowledge, and we are often writing policy for the world we wish existed or the world that exists in conferences, not the world that actually exists, and not how these actors actually behave, and not what they are really willing to do and have done. And so I will say that, like, an understanding of that communities, even if they don't speak the jargon that we do, or even if they're not sort of subject matter experts in the technical ways that we think, too often we act as though they have no knowledge that's useful, nothing that we can learn from, and it sets us back. So a lot of my work is about sort of trying to recognize the limits of my own knowledge, and starting by not just basing research questions, but sort of trying to the extent possible at every level on which I'm working to be interfacing, if I can't directly with community, with people whose job it is to be working directly with those communities all the time. I think I answered the question, but honestly, I don't really remember what it was. That's helpful.
You did good.
I got ADHD, so I be forgetting.
We're in the same boat. We're all in the same space. I lead the Beyond Petrochemicals campaign, and Beyond Petrochemicals has one goal, and it's to stop the expansion of roughly 130 of the most dangerous proposed petrochemical expansions in the United States, which are predominantly located in some core regions, the southeast United States, Louisiana, and Texas. If you've heard of this space called Cancer Alley, it is identified as such because this is where the most petrochemicals are located. Proposed petrochemical plants are located. Also the Ohio River Valley region, so Ohio, West Virginia, Pennsylvania. And the thing that makes this so devastating and dangerous is that these are places that are already overburdened with pollution. They're already inundated with facilities, but also legacy pollution. So just the path of how pollution and segregation and disparate treatment has impacted people for generations. So if you look again at Louisiana, for example, and in the area called Cancer Alley, I'm saying that for a reason because I don't believe in manifesting things. We're gonna rechange that name, so that's just what the other people call it. That if you look at the plots of land, for example, by which petrochemical plants sit on, they are the exact same footprint of plantations from the Civil War period and moving through Reconstruction. So this is legacy pollution. This is legacy land devastation that's happening. And what a petrochemical simply is a chemical made out of oil and gas. So this is the fossil fuels industry way of trying to stay relevant. Mm-hmm. They know that society is moving towards renewable, clean energy future. Everyone in this room probably wants to see more solar and wind and power versus knowing you're using more oil and gas. So the industry had to figure out a way, how do we keep our bottom line? How do we keep making money? Mm-hmm. And petrochemicals are a byproduct of oil and gas drilling. So, we can tell you need some more plastic. And if we can convince you that you need some more plastic because petrochemicals are the building blocks of plastic, that means that their industry stays, and we now have this product that we are trying to figure out how do we deal with waste pollution on. So our role is to simply, how do you stop the expansion of this? Because it's like a tap. if you are filling up a bathtub with water, eventually you have to turn off the tap if you don't want the bathtub to overflow. Plastics are not something that disintegrates. It's not a entity that we can figure out how are we ever going to get it off this planet, unless there's some really good science fiction folks in here and going to figure out how we're going to put it into space somewhere, and even then we don't know that that's the thing to do. But it is how we are identifying the impact to people. Petrochemicals are a triple threat. They impact the health of communities, it impacts our environment, and it is increasing in emissions. Right now, it makes up roughly 10% of the emissions that we're dealing with globally, and that number is going up. So, identifying the places from a policy level that people are the movers is core to how we solve the problem. And it's why I love this work on a ground and grassroots level, because it's about how do we align. Because frontline communities are doing this every single day. They've been doing it since the plantations existed on these spaces. So this is not new to them. It is about how do we resource and create bridges of both communication, resources, funding, so that what they are saying and what they know becomes a part of the policy. If you are in South Texas, if you are in the Gulf states, you don't necessarily have to have, no offense to our scientists, but a scientist is only confirming what Ms. Jones has known for years. And what Ms. Jones has known for years is that the reason there are so many cemeteries that are full of people is because of the toxic pollutions that keep coming over there. Ms. Jones can tell you every single child in that community who has asthma. She can tell you who has some type of chronic health disease. She can tell you who is itching from a rash, because Ms. Jones is nosy, and we appreciate that.
Nosy people.
Nosy people are necessary. But also, it tells us, and there's a point of that information and data that is so critical. Ms. Jones knows how many times that people had to take off work to take care of their sick children. And we can use that actual data to tell us whether or not the industries are telling us the truth on what's in the air and what their work productivity is. Ms. Jones can help us understand how the asphalt has shifted on her street because of what is coming in or what the pipes are doing, because she's going to call the police department and tell them that somebody needs to come down there and stop those kids from going 75, 80 miles an hour because they're running over those bumps in the roads that have been created. This may seem like it's light information, but is the exact information that communities bring to policy. And that policy goes from a local level of things like permitting and land use and decisions that you can make at a city council table or at a tree board planning meeting, all the way through state and even global. I was so excited to hear our sister from Rwanda, because you may not know it, but there are 2 countries that are leading in the Global Plastics Treaty to stop plastic waste pollution: Norway and Rwanda. And to know that frontline communities from South Louisiana are at a global level sitting in spaces to tell these stories about what the impact is and why we don't need more of it, it is the direct line of policy making from a local to a global level, and we have to have more of that.
Yeah, I also want to add that Mrs. Jones, those are also the people who know the actual history of when things were built. So often, particularly when it comes to climate justice, the histories are not written down. They're not easy to follow. It's not necessarily straightforward to figure out where something was built, or like why something was built, where it was built, how it was built. And often, at least that's what I found in my work in Detroit when we were interfacing with community organizers, even around something like water shutoffs, they were the ones who knew the full history of what was going on and also what backdoor deals were made. So then you get closer to understanding what are the real levers behind this? Like, what is someone actually getting out of this? What are the actual background, what's the actual background? Because if you don't know the real levers, you can create things that you think are going to incentivize people, but those weren't the incentives they were actually after in the first place, right? And I say that because all of that matters, and so often when we shrug off community, that's the sort of stuff that you're losing, which has actual tangible benefit, and that we often think of, like you said, as light or ephemeral, or, oh, if we don't get them in the story bank, right, or to tell their narrative, right, we think of them just as sources of good copy, not as sources of good idea or useful history or the things that we're missing in order to tackle a really complex problem.
I just want to name something that each of you have touched on, but I believe particularly in the moment that we are in, you have to call a thing a thing.
Oh, yes.
White supremacy. Can we just name it?
Yeah.
about
Can
it
we
for a
talk
moment?
about
Can we
it?
talk about that for a minute?
I was actually noticing the way in the last panel people brought up men and men's tendencies. We would never do that for white people. But it's not necessarily less true, right? It's not as though those patterns don't exist, right? And it's not necessarily, we like to think of it only as a matter of character, but what happens when you start thinking of it as a matter of legacy, right? It's just sort of what you inherit and what happens when we think of character less as something that is less intrinsic and more extrinsically built, right? I don't know, I just think that it opens up the space to truly talk about white supremacy and whiteness. I don't know, it reminds me of this quote by Susan Sontag. She wrote after 9/11, she was like, yes, let us all grieve together, but let's not all be stupid together. Right? And just in that sense of like ignoring white supremacy, acting like it doesn't exist, we don't all need to be stupid together. Right? It doesn't make us better or kinder or more empathetic or less judgmental to act like it doesn't exist. All it does is make us stupid and also make us way easier to manipulate, which I think we're seeing on a really broad scale. And it keeps us from talking about the ways that white supremacy, if we talk about it, we talk about how it hurts people of color. But I think we also, when you can talk about it, frankly, you can talk about what it makes white people vulnerable to, right? And the ways that it is leaving white people open to manipulation and all sorts of just things that are just hard and sad and unfortunate and that cost all of us, right? I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, you're good. You're good. But I think the another thread to pull on top of that is the paternalistic framework, particularly for communities of colors. You were talking about, what has been named Cancer Alley and your work in Detroit and, the things that have been going on about, we're going to just capture these stories instead of using them as historic reference points, or we don't have a scientist involved, or we know what's best for these communities. Can you talk a little bit? Maybe give some examples of ways that you have come across this in your work and have worked to combat it. Jackie, we haven't heard from you in a minute.
Yeah, sorry. I was just, literally, my mind was just going down this trail around white supremacy and all these ways that. So I thought about recently. A funder asked us to, our work is around the community, and a community in Maryland that has an area median income, household income of $7,000. A community in a black community in Texas that hasn't had running water since the mid-'80s. Our work is about these black communities in Cancer Alley. And so recently we were about to be approved for this grant, and they were like, great, we're ready to approve, but we showed this to our legal department, and if you could just go through and remove all instances of the word black,
What?
then we can move forward. I just thought about like how
This happens all the time.
Yeah.
Particularly since November.
Right.
I mean, the number of grant proposals, websites that have been whitewashed, it is real.
Yeah.
Go on.
And so similarly, like, it's like, but we can't say anything that like either explicitly or even implicitly refers to frontline communities, black communities, and so forth. But yet all the euphemisms in the world, as whole countries, like just one after the other, the mass deportations, everything refers to, you know, these instruments of white supremacy. So I didn't even, I was literally like, all of that was going through my head as you were talking. So I'm like, oh my God, what was the question? Because I was you all just sent me off in this kind of musing by your comments. So anyway, what was the question?
The question was what is an example of when you have encountered white supremacy and paternalistic policy making, and how have you worked to combat it?
Yeah, I mean, I guess maybe I did hear the question in some ways. Exactly. That's exactly it. I mean, I think everything from the work that we are doing to around the very communities that I mentioned and how did you find us, we're now doing this work around engaging those communities, not only in ensuring that material needs are met, but that they have a pathway to the table so that they can actually be a part of a democracy, and then at the same time pushing from the other end in terms of reversing Citizens United that gives corporations personhood, really working on campaign finance reform to get money out of politics, because we don't want people to get to the table and they have no power at the table anyway, because we don't have a democracy. We've never really had a democracy because those folks have never been at the table. And so it's really about, so our work is about real democratization so that we can actually, you know, reverse these policies that keep people in this place of oppression. That's what I'd say in a nutshell.
I think of this in two ways. One is having to acknowledge the history. You can't try to solve a problem and not starting at the beginning and the source of the problem. So the idea that we can ignore the role of white supremacy in the development of these communities that are overburdened with pollution simply puts you at a loss. And it's this unwillingness to deal at that beginning space. It's a hard space. It's a difficult space. It means you have to deal with privilege. You have to deal with the animosities that have come along with being in these spaces and understanding and identifying, where do I sit in this and how do I deal with being comfortable in an uncomfortable situation? Because we must understand that the formation, the simple existence of many of these spaces that require climate justice require us to acknowledge that they were formed as a result of discrimination, they were formed as a result of hatred, and they were formed as a result of our unwillingness to value human life. That's the starting point. Now, once we get past that starting point, now we can talk solutions. And you can start to talk solutions in a way that helps us to not go back to where we were before. But that's our problem right now. We're living in a very hard space. We're living in a space we've seen before. If you recall, and you think of your history, post-Civil War, we went into a period of Reconstruction. Our modern Reconstruction was the Obama era. I served as the regional administrator of EPA in the Southeast under President Obama. So I had all red states. And I'm from a red state. But there was this moment that we had in our history where it seemed like we were moving towards an opportunity of equity, and one that we had been coming together to seek. Very similar to what happened politically in the post-Civil War area and in the period of Reconstruction. But let's not forget what happened after Reconstruction. The onset of Jim Crow, the onset of the KKK, the historical prevalence of people of a majority wanting to come back into a place of power that they perceived that they had lost. We've seen this story before. So it is very important that we identify with what are the levers that helped us to move past that, especially when you talk about climate and climate justice, because the added piece that we have is urgency on the climate crisis. So understanding the urgency now we have to learn this lesson very quickly, understanding where the problems lie in communities of color that have been overburdened with pollution, and bringing us to the space now where we know where we are in the cycle. So let's deal with what the role of white supremacy has been. The second part of this is that the way that we moved in those spaces, it was being visibly invisible. Some of y'all have heard how black women, the 92%, are sitting down. We're not going outside right now. We are resting. We are taking some self-care moments. We are doing our hair. We are sitting down and relaxing with our feet up. Don't be offended by that. I urge people not to be offended by that, because that does not mean that the work is not happening. There's still work that's moving and work that's going on, but there is a power to being visibly invisible. Ask black people who served in country clubs that were segregated, but somebody still had to cook and be the bartender, if we didn't know how to pass messages so that people who thought we weren't listening actually realized that we were listening and we were going back together and putting together a plan. This is not new. We know how to move in these moments. And what's exciting to me is this moment that we are not only rediscovering ourselves, but are encouraging the next generation to learn and be even more creative. If you have not been on social media, TikTok, Blue Sky, or whatever, while we are sitting in this room, you're not doing your job. And I'm so serious about that. Because there are ways that we use the social networks to move messaging and to move action that and I'm Generation X, that my generation might not be familiar with, but we're relying on you all to be able to do it. So that's, again, the second part of that, how to dismantle systems of supremacy by using the networks and the innovation and the technology that we have now and today. So take that as a note. I hope to expect to see when I go to my TikTok and my Instagram reels tonight, I hopefully will see something roll across about what has happened here today. You know, and in the way of the great griot, Kendrick Lamar, being able to send messages to mass groups of people and do it in a way that's meaningful, causes question, and moves to action. Somebody be on TikTok tonight, please.
Picking that up, Heather, and you talked about the moment that we are in. And when we are literally and figuratively on fire in all of the ways. And we're also seeing a lot of silos in the social justice space coming down, because you're talking about understanding how all of these pieces are interconnected and they are all under attack at once. You know, we talk about, we have these conferences and conversations and we end up talking about just one thing. But they are so interconnected with criminal justice reform, bodily autonomy, economic freedom, education, all of these pieces. How have you all connected, or how is your work, dovetailing, being interconnected with the broader social justice space as, people feel like in general, we are under attack?
We can't work in silo. I think one of my favorite pieces that Jackie, you all did, and it's been a few years ago, fossil fuelery. Yeah, I love that. The fossil fuelery report, because it used imagery, it used cartoons, but it also was really good about truth telling in a multidimensional way. It wasn't just fossil fuelery. Understand that these people are lying to you about the costs. of fossil fuels, but that it impacts your housing. It impacts how much money is coming out of your pocketbook. And I say it's so important for us to today get to truth, because there are so many mistruths, distruths, untruths that are out there. But you know one thing that you can trust on? Look at you. You know how much money is in your account. You know how much your cash is worth. Somebody can tell you in a heartbeat that something may or may not be true, but you know how much you paid for your light bill, or your rent, or your internet,
Or your eggs.
or your eggs, right? Grocery store before I left, they were $7.69 a dozen. You know how much you pay. Nobody is going to not convince you that you give them a $20 bill and that's a $5. Okay? So these systems, even within energy and energy dependence, and what the industry is telling us, center and should center around the reality and truth, and who are better truth tellers, and who do you trust more than anyone else. Most people, and again, going back to some of the work that my good sisters on this panel have done, it goes back to who do you trust is telling you the truth. Most people, they're not going to trust their elected official. They trust their pastor. They trust their immediate social network. They will trust their neighbor to tell them whether or not school is getting out early, or if they can go online to find out, they're going to trust the neighbor before they go online. So we have to use these same mechanisms, I think, that help us to understand the connectivity between housing and climate, between healthcare and climate, between police brutality and climate. That was really how I wrote, when I wrote my book, Before the Streetlights Come On, I used climate as the foundation for understanding the connective web for Black Americans. Not that it was something separate, because my friends would ask me all the time, Heather, what the hell are you doing in climate action? That ain't got nothing to do with Black folks in Mississippi right now. And I really, really had to go back to, no, this is an undergirding, and connect as a web versus saying there's climate action and then there's healthcare. No, if we don't understand that it's hot in Black neighborhoods, and hot in Black neighborhoods means you are going to be in the hospital later on and run up your hospital bill. You know, that's where, if we don't understand that it's hot and people get upset when it's hot, and you see increases in domestic violence and child abuse, and you see increases in police brutality because it's hot, that's where I think we find that connection. And I went on and on about, but you know, Jackie knows I love that piece. And that came out of some work that they did a while ago.
So right now, I actually left Roosevelt to work on a book, and I sold the book like 6 weeks before I gave birth. Not the smartest plan, but I did it, and I was sort of waffling on not whether to finish it, but how. But what solidified my desire and decision to do it was in part the fight around the Inflation Reduction Act. Mm-hmm. So I don't know if you all, the Inflation Reduction Act is basically the biggest climate investment federally that the U.S. has ever made. And it was originally supposed to be Build Back Better, whatnot. But basically, when the Inflation Reduction Act came out of nowhere and the climate movement started to try to push for its passage, one of the first things that happened was a very sort of low-key demonization of climate justice. Because one of the main people or main groups to speak up and say, hey, we have questions about the Inflation Reduction Act were climate justice activists because of concessions around opening up public waters in the Gulf for oil exploration, around a desire to sort of gut NEPA that Manchin had secured on the side, et cetera. And people were bringing that up. And some of the first messaging from climate folks, I remember one thing that was on MSNBC, and someone was like, people who are pointing out fault in the IRA, they can't see the forest for the trees. But if we don't save the forest, the forest will burn down. It was a very convoluted analogy. But the point was, there was this constant sort of calling out of climate justice activists as people who did not understand the stakes of climate action or the Inflation Reduction Act, and who were pushing against their own self-interest, right? And coming back to paternalism, there was a real sense of, we know how to solve this problem. You all need to get on board. And if you don't get on board, it's not because you have valid critiques, it's because you don't understand. This is gonna lift all boats. And if your boat sinks first, you know, it's just one of the costs, right? That was the sort of feeling that went along with it. And it was really telling for me, because part of our work on the Green New Deal was trying to build these multiracial coalitions and trying to sort of to both acknowledge the harm and the racist legacy in mainstream climate movement, and the sort of very real and understandable mistrust from climate justice organizations, but see if we could all work together. And it was really telling that it felt like within like 24 hours that all fell apart, and it wasn't because of the people of color. Right? And, but at the same time, there was a real lack of understanding, it seemed, of the long-term consequences. Because one of the things you'll hear people complain about now, the IRA, no one knows what it is. Is that a shock? When you cut off your best, you know, the people who were most involved in communities? Is that a shock when the policies disproportionately benefit high-income homeowners, and we know what those demographics are? Is it a shock that nobody's talking about it on TikTok when it doesn't have any policies for renters? Is it a shock that young people don't care, right? But it was that kind of short-sightedness and that kind of real belief in the political expediency and apparently the lack of consequence of embracing, on some level, white supremacy in order to move something forward that made me end up leaving, because the more and more I worked in climate, the more and more I felt that it's not that we don't have climate solutions, it's that the things that are blocking climate action are so many of the things that have blocked sort of progressive action in the US, and a big part of that is white supremacy. And I looked around and I saw people talking about so many other factors but that. And so the book, like Heather's book, takes climate as a background, but is really interested in exploring the questions of white supremacy and the idea of like, of it as a legacy and of it as a maladaptive legacy. So the book really tries to think about white supremacy as addiction, right? Both in how it operates in our systems and both in how addiction is often a question of legacy and things that are passed down, and also what happens when you think about it as addiction, which is a maladaptive coping mechanism. What does that allow you to ask about what are the needs that you're trying to cope with in the first place? And so that's like my contribution to trying to think about it in a creative way that is, and I tell my own story about my own addiction and my family's history with addiction, because I'm interested in seeing if we can have a conversation that is both honest, but is also very honest about the emotional pulls and the needs that we all face, and just trying to think about white supremacy in a way that feels honest, but also different. because we do need to move forward. And I'm just hopeful that this can help. So I know you asked, like, what are the ways that we're thinking about this more broadly in terms of social justice? And so that's my attempt, but I also am glad, I feel like younger climate activists are way more comfortable making connections between climate justice, and things like police brutality. And I think the other thing that's helpful in there is noticing the people who scoff at those connections as tangential or not existent or as an omni-cause, and being careful then about what advice you then take from those folks, right? Because that happens a lot in climate, and some of the like main people guiding or that we listen to on policy are the same people who will tell you there's no connection between climate justice and police violence or domestic violence or democracy reform. These are completely separate issues. And then we write policy based on that advice, and then we're confused why it didn't work.
Mm-hmm. Indeed.
Yeah, so first off, thank you for repeating the question during your answer. Yeah, so I've had a couple of other speaking engagements this week, and in each of them, I have started off with a poem from this person, Rhiana Fountain, from the south side of Chicago, went on to then quote Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five, which is a minefield of unrepeatable lyrics, but I was able. Then went on to quote Nappy Roots, and then ended with K-Dot, of course. Kendrick Lamar, for people who don't know. And it really, I was really talking about how, none of those folks are necessarily climate justice activists, or environmental justice activists, but all the words that I repeated from their various lyrics were very much about the realities of frontline communities. They were very much about the intersectional aspects of environmental justice and the lived realities. I talk about some of the policies that have been advanced by people who are from and of communities, who are, as they say, people who are closest to the problem are the closest to the solutions. And I think it's Stockton, California, when I think the youngest black male was, and who introduced universal basic income.
Yeah.
And how the data out of that really showed, this is someone who knew what it was like, who knew what it could take to just have a leg up, to be able to be able to go on from there and flourish. And so through that experiment, just giving people universal basic income so they can achieve the basics, then they went on to be able to flourish economically. Across the board. The majority of the people who were given the universal basic income. And when then I also thought about the policies that were passed in California around net metering and around solar. And I thought about I was working with the Genesee Center for Domestic Violence Prevention and Intervention, and they were talking about their electricity bill being the highest bill that they pay. And so we work with them and the Homeboy Industries, which is they do weatherization retrofits and solar installations, and it's former gang members and so forth, people who are formerly incarcerated. And so they actually train the women who were in the domestic violence center to do solar installations. And so not only did they all gain that skill, but they all then went on to be a part of the solar industry, and they were able to get their own homes and be independent. We all know that the financial independence is one of the biggest things that keeps people in the homes of their abusers. And so there's a multi-solving there that was only seen by people who are passing policies who know what's happening on the front lines. And then the final example is in Laredo, Texas, where they're pushing for policies again to have better solar policies across the board. But this one particular organization was working with the immigrant population. They had a surge in immigrant populations. Laredo has more days above 100 degrees than Death Valley. And so their electricity bill was the highest bill. They're able to get a solar installation there as well to be able to then not have any electricity bills at all, and then be able to pour that back into, again, the surge and need for services for the immigrant population, not only because of our punitive immigration policies, but also because we are the biggest emitter in the world, and yet we have these. We have all the folks who are coming across the border due to climate forced migration. So there's the level of intersectionality in each of these examples, and the fact that people on the front lines, as Audre Lorde says, there's no such thing as a single issue struggle because we do not live single issue lives. And so this is representational in terms of intersectional struggles and multi-solving policies that are going to be critical to take us into the type of liberty and justice for all that is set in our Constitution. So thank you.
Indeed, indeed. We're going to open it up for questions in a minute, but these are challenging times, to say the least. And I just had this conversation with an elected official yesterday because she is out there doing the good fight and making good trouble. But I said, how do you keep going? What is giving you hope? And she struggled for a minute in coming up with an answer. But for each of you, you're pushing a huge boulder up a hill. What keeps you going?
I come from a family of faith, have always been a person of faith, and there are so many places in my life where the faith has not only resonated with me, but reminds me that ancestors did not shed blood for me to sit down and cry about how hard it is. It was an effort to make sure that we acted. And that's what emerges for me most of all, is that if we don't have hope and faith that there are solutions, then my God, what did they do all of that work for? Mm-hmm. And I refuse to settle in that. It is hard right now. Make no mistake about it. It's scary. People are losing their lives, their livelihood. Grants have been taken. Jobs have been lost. Families are trying to figure out where the next meal is coming from. Police are following people in real time. We are removing information from spaces where people, including ourselves, can be vulnerable. It's real. This is not a movie. And at the same time, I sit in existence from people who survived worse. Mm-hmm. So that combination for me personally, what keeps me going is because I know I come from people that trusted in the good Lord and prayed that I would be here today. And it was not for me to be here today sitting in a dark, quiet room. It was for me to be here today open and loud about the action that we should be doing. Mm-hmm.
I was also raised in faith, so that's part of it. I do cry a lot in dark rooms, though, about... I do.
Truth is truth.
I will say, though, part of it is recognizing that the time will pass either way. Mm-hmm. Right? Like, so I can either do something about it, right, or do whatever I can manage to do about it, or I can not and be frustrated, but either way I'm gonna have to live through it, right? And so that sort of inevitability of it, for me, makes me think less about hope, because I just think that, like I said, the time is gonna pass anyway. And especially now I have a kid, I have a 3-year-old, and I remember asking my mom and my grandmother what they were doing during civil rights. during the 60s, during these things that I read about in books. And this is a time that's going to end up in books. And so I know that my kid will probably ask, and I want a better answer than I was there. Because they had better answers than they were there, And so I think that's a lot of it. And I also, I don't know, I don't think that hope is overrated, but I am still fuzzy on what hope is. But I do know what fighting is, and that's more tangible for me. So in some ways it's easier to do. And then the other thing is I just really chafe at the idea that someone would take my silence for consent. I just really don't like that, and I don't really want there to be space for someone to interpret me that way. Because I do think that matters right now, especially when people are scared. Everybody is looking at everybody else being like, you think that's messed up too? And so I do think that it is a time where, to some degree, public perception of you, or at least of how okay you are with what is going on, matters.
Thank you. Yeah, I remember the question this time. So I'm also a person of faith, and I cried at Lilo and Stitch. I cry at many commercials, and
Lilo and Stitch is sad.
yeah, it is.
It is
Thank
sad.
you for that affirmation. Yeah,
I cried.
yeah, no, it's definitely touching. And I cried the other day when a young black male gave me my food order through like a drive-through. He was all tatted up, and I just thought about all the possibilities in terms of his life, and just just had me in tears afterwards. And so I would say that what brings me, I guess, partially hope, but just drives me, is those communities that say, "How did you find us?" And in particular, this one community recently in deep rural Illinois, where we're both from Chicago, yeah, I think, and this woman, after she said that, then she promptly burst into tears and said, it feels like we have been in the dark, like crying in the dark, and no one has heard us, and no one has seen us, and finally, you're here and might be able to bring some relief for the situation. And so that it gives me, I guess, hope that what we're doing can actually make a difference. And I'm hoping that all of these individual communities that we work with and the strategy adds up to some type of systems change in addition to change. But at the very least, the hope for change for the people that we're engaging with directly is something that definitely keeps us going. So thank you.
Well, I think that's a great way to wind up this portion, but questions from the audience.
Thank you so much for sharing those insights. I am thinking about self-care and this idea of radical self-care, and I have thinking about our conversations last night with some of the speakers that are here and some IWL scholars. Do you find your work fun? And then regardless, what do you do for fun right now with everything going on? And just, these feelings of hope and fight, what is your reprieve? And again, is your work fun? Do you love it? I mean, I know you love it, but is it fun right now?
Oh, I have a wonderful time. Ask Lori, she will tell you. I am always finding spaces to have fun. But no, very good question, because I do believe in self-care. And I am notorious for finding a foot massage place in every city that I go to. And then my favorite go-to right now is the new daytime soap opera, Beyond the Gates.
Is it good?
I love it. And I'm telling you, the drama. Oh my gosh. It's so good. It's so good. I will find like complete spaces of going off into a different environment and world and space. And it's funny because it always comes back full circle for me. Storytelling is a huge part of our work in climate action. And so I was watching Paradise, if you all watched that series too, right? Just how my brain works. I was watching, I was like, man, this is awesome. And then I saw the sister in braids. I was like, well, how did they get weaving hair down into the mountain? Because that's plastic. That's synthetic. I need to know where did the braiding hair come from? Because if we're going to do hair and we are now in a aftermath, I need to understand what's happening. Are we making it plant-based? And then that actually led me into researching and finding out that there's a Black-owned company that makes plant-based hair called Rebundle. And so we started. They do. So now I've got
Rebundle.
like whole movements into things that bring me joy, that are not necessarily this, but come full circle, and I think goes to the point of this is not single issue, this is not siloed. What I put on my hair, I usually have braids in, but I don't have it right now. But you know, there are all these spaces that bring joy. They're fun. They are love. They are community, and it gives me energy in doing the work. And I love TikTok. Okay, I talked a lot. I'm sorry.
I was about to say I do find my work fun. I mean, in a relative sense. I am, like I said, I'm currently working on my book. And so the freedom to say what I want, how I want, is very invigorating. Especially because a lot of my work for the last 5 years, really since I started working on the Green New Deal 5.5 years, has been very much about moving a message in environments that were often quite hostile to it. And figuring out how to be palatable in lots of ways, and that is exhausting. And I'm like very grateful to not be doing that, and arguably what would be the most hostile environment I've ever had to do that kind of work in. So that I do find fun, but for fun, I love a cozy mystery, which is just a genre of TV where there's just like light murder, but in beautiful locations and often for incredibly petty reasons. One of my favorite episodes is a lady kills someone who's running a rival jam line. So, in the British countryside, so it's better. And so I do like those. And also my son has recently gotten into wrestling.
My son is doing wrestling too.
He's really into WWE, which honestly is invigorating in some ways because it's just drag for straight men. It is. It is. It's just drag for straight men. And it is invigorating to see these giant men so excited to play act getting hurt. Oh! And they just look so happy. And it just reminds me of, like, we all love a little drama. And it's just, I don't know, it's just something so freeing seeing these men, like, play these caricatures of masculinity, but, like, in a way that gives them probably a lot of freedom to express parts of themselves that they might not otherwise, you know? So it's cool. And watching my son learn how to suplex stuffed animals is fun. So that's bringing me a lot of joy, just delving into like his world for a while and what he finds interesting and, you know, learning a lot about this new thing I didn't know much about. My favorite is a German suplex.
We're going to take maybe 2 more questions from the audience.
Oh, that's okay. That's an impossible act to follow.
In the back.
Thank you. Hello. Thank you for the presentation. I'm a landscape architect, and I work in development, and I'm focused on social ecological restoration. and also in championing the climate and mental health space. Could you please talk more about urban renewal as a negative and what has to happen for that to be a positive and what you would call that?
For the sake of time, one of you to answer that one.
Jackie.
Okay. Yeah, sure. Yeah, so as a negative, and I'll just be super brief, it's just that some of the mechanisms that have been put in place to try to attempt to do urban renewal. So it's not the concept of urban renewal, it's the application as it exists. Everything from the community development block grants to municipal bonds to, I mean, I could just give example after example that have been, where these things are end up being kind of a benefit to developers and not to actual communities. That they end up resulting in gentrification and displacement. Once even if they do improve the community, it improves it, and then displaces people right out of the community and so forth. So the post-disaster redevelopment is a classic example of that. So it's not so much the language; it's the actual act, and so. So of course, community-driven planning around improvements, making sure the policies don't, like once the improvements happen, that there's policies in place so that land valuation as it increases, and therefore property taxes don't price people right out of their homes and land, those kind of things. We just need to be super deliberate and about that. So does that answer your question? Yes. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Good question.
There's a question.
You mentioned the scoffing at the idea of different issues being connected. Is there any value to sort of flipping the script or the way of looking at things and just in this enclosed planet, this system that we're living in, just assuming everything is connected until proven otherwise? Is there any value to that, or is that logistically possible, like as a way of thinking?
I can start. I think humanity, people, just in your lived existence, you prioritize what things will come to you or potentially harm or help you first. So when working in communities, it is often what is closest to people that is impacting them that they gravitate to in their thinking. And we have to find better ways to connect the larger problem of climate to that. And that's why I think of it sort of as an underlying or underbedding. Because it would be good if we could get every single person in the room to agree that, how we are moving forward on climate is interconnected. But this table may have a interconnective with saying, my internet is not connected, so how in the world do you want me to talk about climate? Whereas this side of the room may say, well, we're freezing right now and we're too cold to think. And so that's the issue that is preventing them from coming together. That's what it often boils down to at a very localized level. And having community leaders, community people drive the conversation of what is that core piece that they need to agree around to bring everybody to that united space. I think we do a better, we collectively as a climate movement, and this goes to something Rhiana was saying about the IRA, we have to do a better job of listening to the messengers that are telling us how to get the message up and in better place than policy. Otherwise, it doesn't work.
Well, thank you all so much. I think we have definitely seen how interconnected and intersectional, to bring Kimberly Crenshaw into the room, all of this is, and how vital it is for us to really think about who are the people that are closest to the pain and how they can be really useful in solving these challenges if we are open to them, and also challenging our perceptions of what is and what should be. So thank you, Rebecca, for inviting me to do this. Thank you to our amazing panel. Thank you to all of you for your amazing questions.